Hi, Andrew. Good morning. So you're here. So let me know if you're.
We have
There you
audio.
go. How are you?
Oh, it's another Groundhog Day here in Southern California. I'm not going to say that I'm great because it's tumultuous times, and it's
Yeah, I don't.
hard to know what's going on, where we're going, what's happening next, what to prepare for. There's sort of an infinite number of outcomes, and yes, it's a lot of work,
Yeah.
and I'm kind of tired after what 3.5, almost 4 months of this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can't imagine. We're here in Mexico too, in the same situation. I mean, the whole world is in the same situation. So if you don't mind, we can start. And thanks to everyone. Thanks for being connected to our 10th podcast. As you may know, we have launched this initiative with the aim of keeping our audience up to date regarding the recent impacts and rapid changes between the core commercial real estate indicators. As you may know, SiiLA Mexico is the leading analytics and intelligence platform for the commercial real estate. We have over 160 square meters monitored in Brazil and Mexico, and very soon we will launch our platform in Colombia. We hope that we were launching our Colombia platform in the first quarter next year. We track industrial, office, and retail assets. So now today we are honored to have Dr. Andrew Strenk as our guest to talk about the retail market, specifically regarding its evolution in the last 30 years and the challenges that it will face after all this COVID-19 situation. So let me introduce Dr. Stark. Andrew is president of Strategic Planning Concepts International and brings 35 years of real estate strategic planning, site assessment, demographic analysis, and asset analysis to his assignments. His specialty is particularly in the assessment of retail locations and trade areas in diverse multicultural areas. He can draw upon diverse cultural experiences gained from additional 18 years of work as a researcher, writer, historian, and news reporter in Ecuador, Germany, France, Russia, Mexico, South Korea, and Singapore. So this is a lot. This is a great experience you have, Andrew. So thank you very much for being here today.
Well, I'm glad to be able to join you guys and have a little dialogue about where we are and where we're going, and I guess where we've been.
Perfect. So let me start. Since you have worked in more than 600 projects in Mexico in different angles, could you give us a brief context of the evolution of the retail sector over the past 20 to 30 years? Maybe this could help us to understand where we stand today and how to start drawing the future of the sector for the next coming years.
Well, we've seen a lot of change in the past, nothing compared to what we're looking at right now. But if we flip back 30 years, that would be 1990. And if we think about where the retail world was in 1990, it was a very, very different kind of place. Back in 1990, we really only had 4 different kinds of shopping centers at that time. We had the neighborhood center with a supermarket as an anchor. We had the community center with a hypermarket as an anchor. We had the regional fashion mall with department stores as an anchor, and then we had the super regional fashion mall. And that was pretty much, if you were a retail developer, those were your 4 choices if you wanted to do a quote shopping center, a central commercial. We were just starting to get outlets. The early outlets were actually usually just a factory with one single brand, and we were just starting to see the emergence of outlet malls. We were just getting power centers. The I-280 center in Northern California had debuted just in 1989. And this would be a format we'd see spread like wildfire in the 1990s with big boxes, as a lot of larger tenants feeling unwelcome in regional fashion malls exited the regional fashion mall and got together to form centers without department stores that were open air, one level, and these were called power centers. So in the 1990s, we saw the rise and the spread of the power center as another alternative format. We also got in the 1990s the entertainment center. That didn't happen to about the mid-1990s, but with the rise of sort of supersized bookstores and ever larger multiplex cinemas, and we had then the explosion of the Disney store and the Warner Studio store and Dave and Buster's, Sega, Sony, a lot of concepts debuted on the market. So we had the entertainment center. This was a project that didn't have any really fashion stores. It didn't have any department stores. Everything was focused on entertainment. Blockbuster Video was still very big back then. So was Blockbuster Music. So was Virgin Records. So was Tower Records. So there were a lot of options as tenants that aren't even around today, and maybe our younger audience even won't know who they were, but we had entertainment centers appear. We also had the revival of town centers. In 1921, J.C. Nichols debuted the Country Club Plaza in Kansas City, but it was way, way ahead of its time. It was an open air town center, a shopping center that was built and designed to look like a downtown, a main street in the U.S., or sort of a plaza, Zocalo in Mexico, Piazza in Italy. But it didn't really catch on. But in 1990, we had the opening of Easton Town Center in Columbus, Ohio. And it was such a success that we pretty rapidly in the 90s, and then even more in the 2000s, and even more since 2010, have seen the spread of this town center format. And we had the Village Town Center and the Regional Town Center at both ends, sort of the smaller project and then the much larger project. So that was a format that debuted. And then we also had the rise of the Lifestyle Center in the 1990s that spread very, very rapidly in the 1990s and 2000s. This was generally a one-level open-air project with a concentration on food and beverage, which at that time was unusual, wouldn't seem very unusual today, but all of a sudden you had projects that instead of having just one or two or three restaurants, all of a sudden they had 6 or 7 or 8, and doesn't look like much today, but that was a big jump back then in thinking about how to design and tenant projects. So I could go on, but what we rapidly saw was an explosion in formats. That's continued on to today. So today, if you're a shopping center developer and you want to do a shopping center, you probably have more than 20 different formats that you can choose from. We constantly wrestle with this when the client will come in and tell us, well, we want to do a shopping center, and we go, great, what kind would you like to do? And then he doesn't have an answer. So there are still some people out there that don't understand that there are all these different formats of shopping centers, and they have different requirements. They have different requirements for design. They have different requirements for their tenant mix. They have different requirements for their programming. They pull different kinds of customers who come for different periods of time. They have different amounts of cross-shopping. There's a lot of cross-shopping in a regional fashion mall. There's hardly any cross-shopping at all in a power center. They have different demands for logistics. So we've seen over the last 20, 30 years, we've seen this really explosion in retail formats. What we've also seen is what I would call compression. The tempo, the speed is increasing. And so when a new format debuts or a new store, a new brand debuts, it spreads much more rapidly than it would in the past. And in fact, it can spread very rapidly and die in a few years and be gone before a lot of people even realize that it was the thing to have in your project. So that speed is going faster and faster. And this is a factor, we think, for Mexico and much of Latin America, because from our perspective, there's always been a certain reluctance to often adopt things too quickly in Mexico. sooner or later, the trend would come to Mexico. When we first started doing projects in the mid-'80s, the thinking was pretty much that Mexico was about 20 years behind the latest and greatest innovations in the USA. But that window has been shrinking ever since. And if you're in northern Mexico now, it's maybe 3 years, and there are projects underway in Monterrey and in Chihuahua and Tijuana that are trying to cut that down to 0 so that these projects are as state-of-the-art as they can be and would
Hey, Andrew, something happened with your sound. Andrew? Andrew, can you hear me? Something happened with your mic, I think. I can't
okay.
hear. Oh, there you go. There you go.
Okay. Where should I pick up? What was the last word you heard?
Just a couple of seconds before. I mean, it's
okay. So a third trend we've seen in the last 30 years is the rise of specialty retailers. We had some specialty retailers back in 1990, but we've seen really H&M, we've seen all the Inditex brands, we've seen Topshop, we've seen Uniqlo, we've seen Nike and the Puma and Adidas, we've seen a huge number, Lululemon, Lorna Jane. I could go through the different categories. A huge number of retailers debut that didn't exist before 1990, and many of these have become extremely popular and are part of the tenant mix in many projects. This is one of the things that is going to lead me to my fourth thing that's been happening, which is the decline of the traditional department store. And we have this discussion a lot in Latin America. We have this discussion a lot in Mexico, and people go, oh, well, look at Liverpool. They're really strong. And look at Palacio de Hierro. They're doing really well. Department stores are great. They're going to be around forever. And I guess I tend to say is like, well, okay, yes, but remember Casablanca? How many of you remember Casablanca? How many remember Ciudad de London, Ciudad de Paris? Do you remember Dorian's? How about El Centro Mercantil or El Centro Progreso? Fábricas de Francia, Fábricas Universales, Grandalia, La Gran Sedena, Maison, Paris Londres, Porta de Guaymas, Porta de Veracruz, Porta de Hamburgo, Salinas y Rocha, Las Galas, Maison. I could go on and on and on. These are all brands that are dead. They're gone. They're never coming back. But at one time, they were strong department stores. So we look at Sears right now in Mexico, and it's like, I don't know. We think they're going to join the list because Sears in the U.S. is definitely dying. They're dead. And so what's the value of the brand in Mexico? Sure, Woolworth still exists in Mexico, even though it died in the U.S. But is it a strong brand in Mexico? Not so much. And will Sears be able to be a strong brand once the parent company in the U.S. dies? We don't think so. So that leaves us just with two players in the market, and both of those are having some issues, which we'll talk about in a few moments. So what else have we seen? Well, when I first got started, developers used to say, why do I want a restaurant in my shopping center? If people are eating, they're not shopping. They're not spending money. So I don't want any restaurants in my project. And then then we got a few restaurants in the 80s, and we had the development of the food court. And if a project had maybe 5% of its GLA dedicated to food and beverage, that was a lot. And what we've seen since then is 5% went to 10%, 10 went to 15, 15 went to 20, 20 went to 25. Now there are a lot of projects with 30. That's almost the standard now, that 30 or 35% of your GLA in a project is going to be food and beverage. But there are places in the world where it's 40, 45, 50, 55, 60, 70, 80. There are even projects that have 100 tenants, and all 100 of them are food and beverage. So 100% are food and beverage. There are actually analysts out there that think that the centro comercial of the future will be a centro de comidas. There'll be no compras in the traditional sense, that everything will be food and beverage. We're not quite going that far, but if you're a developer or investor, you might want to think about this. I mean, how much food and beverage is too much? We think this will come back. This COVID virus isn't going to last forever. People like to eat. They like to eat out. They like to enjoy different kinds of foods and have different food experiences. So food and beverage, that's a big thing. Finally, the sixth thing I want to talk about, and I could probably say that there's 100 things that changed since 1990, but we'll just focus on these six. The rise of mixed use. Mixed use debuted in the 1960s. It wasn't that big of a deal. There were very few projects that did it. A lot of the projects that were built in the 60s and the 70s, they didn't really work that well. And it really wasn't until the 2000s that we started to see more mixed use, and especially since the recession in 2009, 2010, mixed use has really exploded, because as retail has gone into a crisis mode and we've started to lose retailers, and we've lost big box anchors and department stores as anchors, developers have looked around for what else could be in a shopping center. Well, how about a hotel or hotels? What about office space, particularly co-working office space? What about a medical clinic? What about educational institutions? What about other types of assets in the project? And so what we've seen is almost a flipping upside down of where a project in the past, if it was mixed use, retail was the anchor, and you had some amenities kind of on the periphery. What's flipped around now is that the amenities have become the anchors, and retail is sort of the glue that holds the project together, and it's an amenity for the other assets in the project. We think that trend's going to continue. So those are just a few things that have happened since 1990.
Thank you very much. Probably I'm the only person that remembers Dorian's, because I'm from La Paz, Baja California, and that's I don't think anyone remembered that store.
Well, one time they were big. One time they were big in California and Sonora. Yes. Yeah,
that's true. That's true. Well, let me jump to the second question we have prepared. So before COVID, registered 95% of occupation and steady asking rent ranges in shopping malls, specifically in Mexico City, right? So, however, different types of properties and brands are struggling. We know that now are struggling due to the environment. So from your perspective, which are the main aspects beyond products that retailers/landlords need to focus on to create engagement and with their clients, obviously, and therefore a faster recovery? I mean, I can mention, for instance, brand mix that you just mentioned some of them. Brand mix, space distribution, sense of community experience, format. What do you think about this?
Well, it's all become staying in the game. It's complicated today, but I'm going to borrow a phrase from Simon Sinek. His philosophy is that much of the commercial real estate world today is still geared to the metrics and the formulas and the formats of the past. And these formulas, metrics, and regulations all were built around winning and losing. And so there was a real focus on metrics to determine whether you were winning and whether you were losing. And he calls this the finite game, and suggests that today we're really in a different era. We're in the era of the infinity game. And to stay in the infinity game, if you focus too much on winning, you'll be out of the game. You won't even know that you've been eliminated, because things are changing so fast. And so the focus today is how to stay in the game, and it's complicated. So what do you need to do to stay in the game? Well, some of the things that are happening, and any good landlord or investor needs to be looking at their portfolio very, very carefully to see whether their partners are actually marching in this direction or not. And first of these is, do you have stores? Because we're going to make the somewhat bold statement here. If your shopping center has stores, you're going to become extinct. You're already on the endangered species list. Stores are going away. There will be no more stores as we have known them. There will still be spaces, but they're not going to look or feel like traditional stores. They're going to be divided into front of house and back of house, if we can borrow a term from our friends in the hospitality industry, another asset category. Back of the house never used to be particularly important. It was usually pretty small, and all the focus in the store was front of the house. But now that's flipping around. The front of the house is becoming a showroom. If I can give you an example here, there's a chain of eyeglass retailers in Los Angeles, around the world actually, but they have stores here in Los Angeles, Gentle Monster. And when you go in, you think you're in an Asian art museum. And only after you've circulated around the store for a while do you realize that, oh, you're actually in a store, not in an art museum. Same thing if you go to an Air Jordan store here. Your first reaction is, well, you've come to a sports gym. And only after you've been there for a while do you realize that, oh, the gym is the basketball court is part of the store, and it's actually a store, but it looks and feels like a basketball court. So when I talk about showroom, that's what I'm talking about. You go to Samsung today, and the Samsung stores, they have a huge video board there and giant letters that says, "We are not a store." We need those who are going to survive need to get out of the mentality that they have stores. They're going to have showrooms, and in the front of the house, it's going to become much more entertainment oriented than it used to be. It's got to become an experience for the visitor. It's got to be something that connects with them. So visual merchandising gets a lot more important, both on the facade, the window displays, the aisles, the interior layout and design, the kinds of shelving and fixtures and racks that you use, the textures and the materials, the colors, the lighting, whether you have comfortable furniture to sit down in the store, whether you have artwork in the store. All of these things are now part of store design. It's not just a bunch of tables and merchandise on them. It's about more than merchandise, because, as you know, we don't have to go to a store to get stuff anymore. We can order it online. Depending where we are, it might take a little while to get there, but we don't have to get in a vehicle and have ourselves driven or drive to a place and find a place to park and then find the store. We don't have to do that anymore. We can just sit back and watch Netflix all day and use our cell phone for a few minutes and have whatever we need delivered to us. So why would you go to a store in the future? Well, only if it's really interesting, if it's really cool, if it gets you excited, or you can have an experience there that you can't have on your phone. So the ordering stuff online isn't maybe the sexiest and most exciting thing to do, but going to a store, if it has the right scents in the air and the right visuals to get you excited and the right kind of background soundscape and all of these things, it engages all of your senses. And you can kind of really get into it and think, hey, I like this lifestyle, I like this brand. So we're going to be seeing stores becoming much more theaters than traditional stores, just with merchandise on racks and tables. Meanwhile, the back of house part of the store is also going to change, and it's going to become a fulfillment center. We're going to talk, I think you've got a question about omni-channel in a few minutes here, but this is the omni-channel thing. Stores are becoming fulfillment centers. All of those packages by Amazon and Federal Express and Estafeta and being delivered to you, where are they coming from? They're not always going to be coming from huge 100,000 square meter industrial warehouses. They're also going to be coming from stores, because stores are going to become mini fulfillment centers. That means the back of house of the space has to change. It generally gets larger in how it's laid out and how it's designed, how it's accessed from loading docks or from service corridors, and how quickly merchandise can get in and out. Speed efficiency is everything for delivery and fulfillment. So you're going to have two different activities going on in the same space, we think, inside your quote inline spaces in a project. Part of it's going to be showroom, theater, and part of it's going to be fulfillment center, distribution center. So that's a big change from what we have now or what we've had in the past. Second, what else is going to happen here? Programming. This is still in its infancy here in Mexico. Programming is hundreds of events a year. If you go to the Grove in Los Angeles, the Caruso project, they have more than one event a day. They have something like 520 or 30 events a year. Palisades Village, Americana Brand, all the Caruso projects do this. This is way beyond the traditional, well, let's celebrate Christmas and Semana Santa and Father's Day, Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, Independence Day, Benito Juarez's birthday, Cinco de Mayo, Constitution Day, New Year's, and a few more. No. This is finding things to celebrate all year long, every day. There's some event of importance, Bastille Day or St. Patrick's Day, somewhere every day in the world there's something to celebrate, and projects that are leading edge do that. That's programming, and then programming is it's events, it's fashion shows, it's food fairs, it's food festivals, it's wine tasting, it's athletic events and competitions, it's classic car shows, it's theaters on the common area in the summertime, it's movies on the lawn in the summertime, it's outdoor yoga and Pilates classes, it's all kinds of things. It's book signings, it's limited only by your creativity and innovation. But programming is a part of where we're going. So a project that previously was a centro de compras needs to become a centro de actividades, a centro de eventos, a centro de programas. If it's not those things, it's going to find itself having less and less success, less sales, lower rents. It's eventually going to become obsolete. So programming is a big thing. Third phenomenon that's going on right now and is an answer to your question here about what are people doing. Pop-ups, still not widely adopted in Mexico, but certainly among leading edge projects around the world. Pop-ups are here to stay. These are not permanent kioscos. They are not islas. A lot of developers in Mexico still think of the pop-up, well, it's just another fancy name for a kiosco and we'll sign a 5-year lease. Nope. Pop-ups are there for a day or 2 or 3, maybe a week, maybe a month or 2. That's it. They're temporary structures. Most often they're containers, but they can be built structures. They can be tents. They can be lockers. They can be wooden constructions. They can be groups of pallets. They can be just groups of tables and chairs with some furniture. But a pop-up is there for a short period of time. And projects that don't have pop-ups are going to struggle. Why are they important? Because they produce novelty. It's something new. The customer has changed today, and the customer that we're dealing with is not our parents or our grandparents. Today's customer doesn't want to go to the same project and see the same stores with the same merchandise for 3 months. They want to know what's new. If they go even now 2 or 3 times and there's not something new, they're already bored. Well, it's pretty hard to change all of your inline tenants every couple of days, but pop-ups, you can change them. So pop-ups is going to be part of the environment going forward. And this whole COVID-19 has accelerated this, as with some of these other trends that were happening already, but slowly. The whole virus has accelerated the trend. So what was happening in 5 years, boom, now it's happening in 5 months. That's the impact of the virus here. So all of these trends are related to this. The virus is just moving them from first gear into 5th gear. So what else is happening? Well, food trucks. They're kind of, if you will, the equivalent of the pop-up restaurant. They're mobile. They have high levels of sanitation and hygiene. They don't have a lot of the drawbacks because the food is consumed outdoors and tables and chairs. So social distancing and social spacing is possible with a food truck in a way that a table service restaurant struggles a little bit with having proper spacing and proper social distancing. Food trucks can bring novelty. They can bring new food concepts into your project quickly. Some of them will want to eventually open up inline restaurants. On the other hand, some very, very successful inline restaurants in the U.S. have food trucks where they use the food trucks to experiment with new menus and new combinations of food before they actually put them on the menu in their table service restaurants. So that interaction goes both ways. And if you have a lot of programming, which we just talked about, and all of a sudden you're having more people coming to the project, well, they're going to want to eat too, but the capacity of your table service restaurants may be somewhat limited. Food trucks can solve that very, very quickly because you can bring them in for a special event on a weekend or a holiday or whatever, and then they're gone. But of course, you're going to need the space for them, and we're going to talk about that in a moment here. 5th thing that's happening here, and there's only one more. Again, I could talk for a long time on this topic, but in response, we're seeing a much more and faster transition to omni-channel retail, omni-channel strategies. What is omni-channel? Simply, the customer wants to be able to buy anything, anywhere, anytime. So no matter where the customer is in the world, at home, in the office, on the beach, in the gym, they want to be able to order whatever they want. And they want their cell phone there, and they want the store or the restaurant to deliver it to them wherever they are. And that might be the store or the restaurant. They just want to order in advance so it's ready when they get there. Or maybe they want it delivered to their office or to their home. But that's omni-channel. Omni-channel is using every distribution channel possible. And there'll be new ones that we don't even know about today while we're sitting here talking about this. Every possible distribution channel to get the product to the customer. That is omni-channel. And in the past, we had stores. If you wanted merchandise, you had to go to the store. And then we started to get e-commerce in the end of the 90s and the early 2000s. And you could go online and get product. And some of you may remember in the days of catalogs, where you got a catalog in the mail and you could order from the catalog. Well, that's a distribution channel as well. And some brands are experimenting with bringing catalogs back as another channel of distribution, in addition to online and in addition to in-store sales. But this is more complicated than it sounds. It's easy to say, great, we're going to have an omni-channel strategy here, but in order to execute that, you need to make sure that you've got the payment systems in place, that you've got the training in place, that if you're a restaurant, you actually can do takeout and delivery, that you've got curbside pickup, that if you're an inline store, that you've actually got the logistics systems behind you that are going to be able to deliver the product quickly to the correct customer at the correct address, and to do it in a timely and efficient manner without destroying or breaking the package. This requires a lot of changes in supply chains, and some retailers have done this transition extremely well. Others have not done it so well, and some have been thinking about it. Well, the whole COVID virus thing has obviously forced retailers to think about this a lot more, because if your store's closed and people can't come in and buy things in the store, but you still have merchandise, maybe you can still be selling something. And it's really interesting if you go down the list of the top 500 retailers in the US, and you can see that there's some retailers actually selling more in terms of percentage than they were pre-COVID. And then there's some that are selling at 90, 85, 80%, which is pretty darn good. And then there's some that are like 40, 35, 25% of what their previous sales were. Well, they did not have a good omni-channel strategy in place, and they're paying the penalty now and trying to play catch up. And with modern technology debuting as fast as it is, it's tough to play catch up in this game here. So the final thing I want to talk about is what retail landlords could be thinking about here, besides what we talked about in reconfiguring stores and thinking about programming and adding pop-ups and adding food trucks and having an omni-channel strategy. The sixth thing is flexible spaces. As a landlord today, you have to be able to look at your space in a project and go, this could be anything in 5 years, or maybe even in 3 years. Can it really be something? Or am I stuck with the fact that it's got to be a fashion boutique forever? Because you've got to be able to look at your space today and say, oh, it could be a restaurant in a few years. It could be a small sports gym in a few years. It could be a medical clinic in a few years. It could be an educational tutorial service. It could even be a residential housing unit, or it could be a small boutique hotel. Space today has got to be flexible, because everything is changing so fast. If you're hardwired into, you're going to have the space and it's only going to be a fashion boutique forever for the next 20 years, you're not going to be in the game. We're in a world where you've got to be able to change and transform and mutate, adjust, adapt, reposition, rebrand. It's showtime, and whether you want to be in showtime or not, it's showtime, and you gotta play. You're either in the game we like to say, you're either in the game or you're not. You can't be half pregnant here. You're either pregnant or you're not. There's no half pregnancies possible in the retail game today. So are you ready? We hope so. We hope that maybe what we're saying here will help you get ready.
Sure it is. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things that you just mentioned. I'll jump to the maybe the last couple of questions, Andrew, and I'll try to mix them because I think there's like there's something in common in both questions, and then at the end we will try to summarize a little bit what you just said, because I find this very interesting. So let me ask this. According to SiiLA's investor survey in Q2 2020, the marketing period for shopping centers goes from 12 to 18 months, and this is very important for investors, right? Because the underwriting should be according of this kind of metrics, right? So this means that if a tenant moves out, the vacancy period for the space would be at least 12 months, right? So the current environment is pushing a great number of brands and tenants to think their leases. So that's one question. What do you suggest for both sides, tenants / landlords, to be less affected? And the other one, I'll try to mix it. A few weeks ago, we conducted another survey, which we called market recovery, right? So one of the questions was related to the rent collection and how it was affected by the health emergency, right? For June, we ended up with 35% of rent collection in shopping malls in Mexico City, right? 34 to 35%. So do you think that the current lease structure in Mexico will change? Will there be more flexibility when signing contracts with perhaps more breaking clauses and less commitment for long period agreements? So I'll just try to mix both because I think there's some things in common. But what do you think about this? For one side, the vacancy period, and for the other one, the lease structure in Mexico. What do you think?
Change is coming. And I didn't mention at the beginning, but for everybody's watching, if they haven't read this book, this would be a really good book to read. I'm not the author, and I don't get any royalties from this book, but this is a really, really good book because this is a good snapshot of what's happening right now. And I talk about you need to be in the game. You need to get in the game. So what's the game? The game is changing. The rules are changing. If I could pull an analogy from the world of football, soccer here in the USA, what do we know about this? Well, this is a game where you got 11 guys on each side, and there's a goal at each end, and the periods are 2 periods of 45 minutes with an intermission in between, and you can't use your hands, and you have to kick the ball with your foot into the goal to score a goal, and the referee has to signal that it crossed the line for that to count. That's what the retail game used to be like. But what's the retail game today? Well, the retail game today is that from minute to minute, the referee can change the number of players that are involved in the game. So the number of players can double. They can go to 20 players, 30 players, and now it's 5 players. Now it's only 1 player. Now it's 50 players. And there are multiple balls. There's not one ball. There's more than one ball. And you can use your hands, but only for 5 minutes, or only your left foot, or only your right foot. So the rules change every minute. That's kind of what's happened in the retail world right now. So how does this impact leasing? Well, if you're not prepared for this, if you're for a landlord, you get this thing of 12 to 18 months or more to fill the space. And I'm going to be a little harsh here, but it's like, shame on you. That means you weren't prepared. You got caught, to coin a phrase, with your pants down. That's a bad thing, actually, in public. So why? Because you didn't have a plan B. Every landlord today, for every project and every tenant, should have a plan B. What happens if Liverpool closes half its stores? What if Palacio de Hierro closes half of its stores? What if Best Buy closes half of its stores? What if Bed Bath & Beyond goes under? It's kind of struggling right now, goes dark. We've had a lot of stores that have gone dark in the last 20 years. Sports Authority and Circuit City and Two Guys and Linens and Things and Wet Seal and American Apparel and The Limited and Coldwater Creek, and it's a really, really long list, and Toys R Us, and we're looking at JCPenney going under, and Neiman Marcus going under, and Saks Fifth Avenue is bankrupt, and so is J. Crew, and GNC just went out of business. So almost nobody is safe now. Even Inditex has announced it's going to be closing 1,200 stores. So you shouldn't wait until either a store goes dark or the lease comes up for renewal and your tenant tells you he or she doesn't want to renew, and then it's like, oh my God, I've got to find a replacement tenant. That should never happen. You should be planning all along with a plan B for every space. And you should have a list of tenants that could take that space. You've done your due diligence, you've done your research, you know what they're looking for, you know the store size they're looking for, you know the kind of co-tenants they want to have in a project. You know what kind of visual merchandising they have and whether that fits into your project or not. You know what kind of rents they can afford to pay, so that fits with your rent profile or not. But all of this is what we would call homework. You've done your homework. It's in advance. So if somebody goes dark or after the COVID-19 they don't reopen, you're not surprised. You were already ready for that. And we try to work with our clients and constantly tell them that. Don't wait for events to overwhelm you. Don't be reactive. Be proactive. Constantly be thinking about, what do I need to do to get ready for the future? This is actually a big topic, and it's a lot more complicated. I can only kind of touch on some points here in a few minutes here because there's so many aspects to it. But what's involved with this is this Plan B. One of the things you need to think about when you're thinking about the Plan B is, do you have enough CapEx in your budget? A lot of projects run into trouble because they don't have enough CapEx. They haven't set aside enough reserves for tenant improvements or for refurbishing or rehabilitation. And so when a tenant goes dark or leaves, then they expect the new tenant to do all the work, to pay for all the costs, to convert the space. But the space often was customized for the previous tenant, doesn't perfectly fit the new tenant, and the new tenant goes, well, I don't really want the space, or it's going to take me 12 months to rebuild the space. If you have a CapEx budget that's available, you're able to offer tenant improvement allowance. This is going to be widespread in Mexico. It's already there. And those of you that have to deal with Inditex and H&M and some of the fast fashion retailers know that this can often be $1,000 a square meter and more in tenant improvement allowance. We're going to see this spreading, but if you want to shorten your 12 to 18 month time frame, you're going to have to cough up some money up front to help the tenant get into the space more quickly. Because the sooner they get in, guess what? The sooner they can start paying rent. And the longer it takes for them to make the changes, well, you can sit back and say, yeah, that's not my problem. You want to be in my shopping center? There's the space. Take it or leave it. You don't really want a space that's under construction for 12 months because it's a dark space. They may be paying you rent, but they're not driving any pedestrian traffic. It's basically a dark hole in your project, and it's hurting the rest of the tenants, certainly the neighbors. So you want to speed this process up. So it's a combination of having a plan B. It's a combination of having enough CapEx. It's having technology. A lot of projects are slow to adopt technology. The real estate industry as a whole has been slow to benefit from a lot of the technological improvements that have gone on. But every shopping center today should have super, hyper, high-speed, state-of-the-art fiber, video, audio, voice, data, all of these connections. And they should have it both cabled and wired, so there's plenty of redundancy in the system. Because today, we talked a little earlier about omni-channel. Omni-channel is not just about gee, well, we're selling online and, oh, we're also selling in the store, but omni-channel is selling through every channel possible. That means in order to do that, you have to be able to play as a retailer on all the different social platforms that are out there. And the number of social platforms is multiplying. There's a digital highway out there. You need a digital strategy. And that digital strategy is connected to your store logistics. It's connected to your supply chain for your different retailers, but it's also connected to your ability to lease space quickly. Because if I'm a retailer, gee, your download speed is what, 20 megabits per second? But these guys over here, it's 200 megabits per second. I think I want to be in their project. I don't want to be in your project. You can easily say, well, it's not my problem, Mr. Retailer. That's up for you to decide, but do you want to play in the game or not? You're either in the game or you're not. If you can't be half in the game. So this issue of technology is really, really important. Most projects could do a lot about improving their technological face to the world. One of the terms we use a lot is don't be roadkill on the digital highway. And a lot of retailers and a lot of projects are in fact roadkill on the digital highway. They don't even know that they've been run over. It's unfortunately very, very true. So we think it's ridiculous. There's no reason that it should take 12 to 18 months. But guess what? If you don't have a plan B, you don't have the most modern technology in your project, you don't have a sufficient CapEx budget, et cetera, yeah, it's going to take 12 or 18 months or more. But it doesn't need to. So the burden is on the landlord to decide that they really want to get in the game, or no, maybe this is too much work. And if this all sounds too much work, then retail is a bad asset category for you. You should get out because it is very competitive. You should find another asset category, residential, industrial, something else where it's not changing as fast and it's not as competitive. But if you want to be in the retail game, you got to understand that you got to pay to play, is an English term. And if you don't pay to play, it's going to be difficult to get in the game. So that was from the landlord side. What's happening on the tenant side? Well, the bad news for investors is, guess what? That nice 20-year lease is going away. It's going to be like the woolly mammoth and the saber-toothed tiger and a lot of species that went extinct. It's going to become more and more and more rare. We don't know today whether any of the brands today are going to be around in 20 years. If you wonder about that statement, just go back and take a look at what the top brands were in the year 2000. And if you really want a shock, go back and look at like the top 100 retailers in the year 1980, and then look at today's list, and you'll see what kind of change has gone on. Well, that change is compressing. It's speeding up tremendously. So a lot of retailers, they don't know what their needs are going to be. Forget about 20 years. Forget about even 10 years. They're not even sure what their needs are going to be in 5 years and what kind of store they're going to need, how big it will need to be, whether we even need stores at all or not, and what those spaces will look like. So they're very reluctant increasingly to sign long-term leases that lock them into the traditional structure of projects. So expect shorter and shorter leases and expect much more complicated contracts. The length of contracts is going to get longer and longer and longer. There are going to be more and more exemptions and exclusions and exceptions and co-tenancy requirements that if so-and-so and such are not in the project, then I have a right to terminate with no penalty. So if Zara leaves the project tomorrow, Mr. Landlord, I'm out of here and I owe you no more money. The lease is terminated. We're going to see a lot more of those kinds of leases. This is not good news for landlords unless they're prepared for it. So lease terms are going to get shorter. Leases are going to get more complicated. There are going to be a lot more clauses in that. This is going to require a lot more work for commercial brokers, and for those of you that are landlords, this means changes in compensation schedules, because it's going to be a lot more work. If you're filling your project with a lot of pop-ups and a lot of food trucks on 1 and 2 and 5 and 7 day leases, that's a lot more work to get to filling the space for the equivalent of 5 years than just signing one lease with one tenant for the next 20 years. So if you think the traditional compensation schedules for your brokers, whether they're in-house or not, are going to be the same, you're going to have to rethink that. So everything in the industry is changing, and it's changing fast. This is a really difficult point. I mean, we've had a lot of sort of lucha with clients here. They say we're not getting the tenants we want in our project, and when we get around to talking about compensation, we find out, well, they're compensating their team members the same whether they lease to Aldo Conti or Louis Vuitton. Well, it's a lot more work to get Louis Vuitton into your project. A lot more meetings, a lot more phone calls, it's a lot more correspondence, a lot more time and effort. And if I'm only going to get the same percentage commission based upon square meters, well, why do I want Louis Vuitton on the project? I might as well go get Coppel or Aldo Conti or somebody. It's much easier. But you're going, no, you can't do that. This is a high-end project. We want luxury tenants. Well, then you gotta compensate your leasing team. So everything is changing here. Retailers are changing the way they operate and changing their expectations because they're chasing the consumer. And to understand what's going on, it's helpful if retailers get a lot closer to the consumer. And you know, I showed a book earlier. You know, for those of you that want to know the consumer, here's a great book that you should read. It's called, you know, Why We Buy. Understand your consumer, because this is what the retailers are chasing. And if as a landlord you don't understand what your retailers are trying to do, you're not going to be in the game. So if you don't want to read that one, Paco also wrote this book, which is What Women Want. Remember, the majority of shoppers in projects are female, and so the more you understand about them, yeah, that's great. And while I'm at it here, you know, here's another book. Do your homework. So all of you listening to this, I'm giving you homework. Read these books, and don't just listen to me. Listen to some other experts as well. You've got to, yes, is it more work than you've been used to doing in the past? Absolutely. ULI Conference 2009, San Francisco, Tom Peters stood up in front of 5,000 of us real estate executives, and he said, if you want to survive in the future, you need to be prepared to work twice as hard, twice as much, twice as fast, twice as smart, be twice as innovative, and get paid half as much. If you can do that, you'll stay in the game. So there's the challenge.
That's a big challenge. That's a big challenge. Well, you know, this hour went like very fast. Andrew, thank you very much for all your words, to share all your experience in this hour. So I'll summarize like very quick. Some of the trends that you just mentioned was where pop-up stores and pop-up restaurants, programming, experiences. You know, we have to start, you know, thinking in a very serious way the experience part of the shopping malls, right? Because we talk a lot of experience, right? But we have to start thinking in a very serious way. So and then fulfillment centers in the backyard of the shopping mall of the shopping mall. Then technology, and I can add technology as a service. Now technology, data, information is crucial. It's very important to take decisions, right? And then, well, thank you very much for all the homework you gave us. It's very important, and we just wrote the name of the books in the chat. So if everyone wants to take note. So well, thank you very much.
Here's one more, just to keep you. There's an extra credit, we'll call that.
Oh, thank you, thank you very much. The beauty of shopping. So Anna, please do us a favor and just write it down in the chat. Well, Andrew, thank you very much once again. It was really a pleasure to have you here. We're honored to have you here, and we thank you for sharing all the experiences you have in this last years.
Well, I'm glad I could participate. Hopefully it was helpful and everybody came away with at least a few words of wisdom that they can apply to their particular situation. Everybody's situation is different. It's not one size fits all, but it's a world of transformation right now. That's a lot of challenge, but it's also a lot of opportunity. And whether that becomes a challenge that breaks you or an opportunity that leads you to success, that depends on you, because it can cut both ways. The challenge is also an opportunity.
Totally. I agree on that. Well, thank you very much to you, to your team. Thank you very much. See you, I hope, in the very near future. Thank you.
Okay.